Hello, YouTubers, and welcome back to another episode of Freedom Friday here on the Ohio Patriot Education Network YouTube channel. I'm, as always, your host here, the Ohio Patriot, and for today's episode, we're going to talk about why Trump must invoke the Insurrection Act now to stop the terrorist left from continuing on with their terrorism that they've been committing in basically everywhere across this country for the past, 20 years or so, give or take. But really, more recently in Minnesota and a few other various leftist-run states is what it is there. So we're going to discuss some of the things that happened this week that basically warrants this, and then we're going to go over a bunch of different articles about Trump potentially invoking the Insurrection Act, what the Insurrection Act is, what seditious conspiracy is, et cetera, and why these people should be charged with these various crimes and be, subject to us actually invoking the Insurrection Act itself, so it is there. Because the fact of the matter is, right now, if Trump doesn't invoke the Insurrection Act right now, number one, there's not going to be midterm elections. That's just a given. There's not going to be midterms at all, dude. Because we're going to have legitimately fighting in the streets by then is what it'll be. Number two, you will most likely not have elections ever again, is what it is then. Because if it does go to that point where it is, fighting in the streets, potential second civil war, whatever the case be there, it's going to be a long-lasting situation where it's probably going to become a 1776 situation again, dude. So, yeah, might as well just do it now is what it is and get it over with, because the fact of the matter is we have videos coming out this week of various leftist terrorists legitimately conspiring with each other, which is just a conspiracy, by the way. I'm going to point that out right now, honestly, to break into either FBI agents or an ICE agents, whatever. I'm not sure which vehicle it was, but it was some federal agent's vehicle where they legitimately put a tow strap around various metal boxes in the back that were supposed to be I think essentially it was supposed to be a vault case, basically, is what it is there. Or a vault safe thing for their weapons and then any proper documentation and stuff like that, because they stole everything out of there, dude. They stole not only a federal agent's rifle, they also stole a whole bunch of arrest warrants and stuff like that, and other things that had federal agents' names on them and stuff like that there. So you basically have essentially they have targets now is what it is, and that in of itself is a scary fact when you think about it, logistically speaking, because now that they have other people's names and stuff like that, dude, we all know the left loves to dox people, dude. God fucking forbid they can go, find these people now. And now you got 20, 30 leftists on the front steps of some Fed's fucking doorstep or whatever the case be. And then that's going to lead to its own thing where it potentially could lead to a martial law situation. And specifically, it needs to lead to an Insurrection Act, is what it is, invocation, which, by the way, if you guys don't know, the last Insurrection Act was during the 1992 LA race riots, which it should have been in 2020, honestly. Really, that's my biggest problem with Trump right now is what it is, dude, is that he should have invoked this shit at least 5 years ago during the 2020 fentanyl Floyd riots is what it is then. So, or BLM riots, what we're going to call them there. Literal race riots is what they really were the other day. But yeah, it's just a scary situation all the way around. And then not only that, you have retard fucking Black Panthers these days, which, let's be honest with ourselves, dude, the entire Black Panthers group has always been fucking retarded. They're the exact reason why a lot of gun control exists in this country right now is what it is. Specifically for those who don't know, when you look back at the history of gun control in this country, it was back in, I think it was either 67 or 68, 1967, 68, someplace in there, is when these fucking dipshits, the original Black Panther party movement, whatever we call it there at that point, terrorist fucking blacks is what it is. It's called what it is, actually. Decided it was a good fucking idea to take a bunch of shotguns into the California State House and fuck around and then hand them off to the cops is what it is. But what's interesting is when you look into that, and this is the problem, Tim Pope brought it up pretty good the other day with the this new Black Panther guy that was talking about using weapons against what it is. And it's basically, I forget exactly what the term was Tim used, but it's essentially these people don't think beyond the straight line in front of them, basically is what it is there. And that's the problem, dude. That's what happens when you have low IQ dipshits out there that have voting rights, that have the ability to, Second Amendment rights, etc. That's what it is they don't think past the next 5 minutes of their life, basically, what it is there. And so what ends up happening is a lot of the cases, they'll do criminal shit or they'll commit like criminal acts, whatever the case be, and then be like, what do you mean I'm going to prison now for various fucking felonies? It's like, yeah, because you're a fucking dumb motherfucker is what it is, dude. It doesn't think properly is what it is. It doesn't actually think beyond, the next sentence, basically, is what it is there in many cases. And so what ended up happening was in the 60s there, you had these retards that were the Black Panthers at the time do that little fucking, show of force, basically what it was. But they didn't think ahead of like big picture scenario and like long-term ramifications of that stuff, because what it led to then was you had Ronald Reagan at the time was the governor of California, and he's like, well, fuck these people. We're not allowing guns in the fucking state houses anymore in the state of California is what it is there. And because the way California laws worked back in the day, and because they were so influential across this country for some retarded reason, I have no fucking clue what hell we ever followed California for that matter, but, of course, you got people back in the day, obviously. So you basically had Reagan do it in California, the California State House, and then you had a bunch of other Democrat state houses across this country, and then Republican/Rhino ones too, for that matter, enact the same shit. And that's exactly how you had gun control be part of state houses now, is what it is, where you can't actually legally carry into a state house in many cases. There's a few states that still have it where you can. At least I know Michigan did at one point. I don't know if they still do or not. I think probably Whitmer and company try to do that now, is what it is, take away the rights there is what it is there after 2020 and stuff. But anyway, there's still a couple as far as I'm aware, but it's the majority, like I would say at least, I think it's like 35 plus or so, maybe 40 or so, give or take. You cannot legally carry into a state house in this country, which is fucking bullshit, because it is a complete denial of American citizens' rights to be able to be armed at any time is what it is there. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was talking to our old friend DJ Play Nice, and he was discussing with me about how Nebraska's worked at the time, or whatever the case be. And I'll tell you what, it was like the most jacked up ass fucking law in the books ever, because it was a situation where you could basically go into their state house armed, but you had to do it in like such a weird ass way where you basically were like breaking the law just to like walk through a fucking threshold is what it is there. And I was making a joke with him one time about like, because my understanding is like, if you had a concealed carry permit at the time, which is before obviously Nebraska became a constitutional carry state, you could carry in, but you had to be like open carrying is what it is there. And so the problem with that is if you have a concealed carry permit, and then when you open carry, like you're basically in a situation where you gotta like prove to them like, oh yeah, here's my stuff openly or whatever the case be. You just like walk to the door like backwards with like your gun in like some weird position on like your side or something like that where they can see it, and then just simply walk in regularly after the fact or something like that. It would just be like so retarded. Basically, it's not even funny. But this is the problem again when you don't have full rights because of a bunch of stupid motherfuckers back in the day of a different race is what it is. I'm not trying to make this racial or anything like that, but like society did at that time, obviously, dude. Like you had, and I think it's funny too because you look at most gun control in this country, and it basically goes back to a quote unquote racist, classist society is what it is there. And what's interesting is like in some aspects, like when the Insurrection Act itself too, for that matter, and like how it originally started and whatnot, like one of the first Insurrection Act suppressions was over slavery stuff is what it is. Slave rebellion is what it is there. So, it kind of makes sense back in those days for like people not wanting to have like some crazy motherfuckers armed because I mean shit, look at all these criminals now that like fuck, I mean you got specifically the black race here in America makes up like roughly 13% of the population, but yet somehow it accounts for 50% of all homicides in this nation. Like what the hell kind of nonsense is that, dude? It's just fucking nuts is what it is, dude. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's just it's a crazy situation all the way around, man. And it doesn't help when you have these idiots that again don't think past the next 5 minutes of their life is what it is there, going out there and making threats and basically proving that the Black Panther movement was fucking a bunch of retards to begin with what it is there and always has been. So yeah, that's pretty much it for that one. Moving on to other stuff today that we're going to talk about for a minute. So we have a few different articles that popped up in the past like 12 hours or so about insurrection and the possibility of Trump invoking the Insurrection Act is what it is then. So we're going to go over a few of these, at least headlines anyway, of them. So you got this one from Axios, how Trump could use the Insurrection Act to pummel Minnesota. Well, first off, it doesn't need to just be Minnesota. It needs to be a bunch of different states, dude, because the fact of the matter is when you look at the fraud stuff, it's not just in Minnesota. It's here in Ohio. It's in Michigan. It's in Maine. It's in a bunch of different states, obviously, and especially in California, too, for that matter. Oregon, Washington State is another one as well. So yeah, if he's going to invoke the Insurrection Act, it needs to be like legitimately like anywhere from like 10 to 20 states, honestly, is what it needs to be, dude. And it needs to be Minnesota needs to be a start, basically, and then you just keep going down the line is what it is there. Because the fact of the matter is, when you start looking at the Insurrection Act specifically, is what it is there. There have been presidents over the last couple centuries now who have invoked this stuff in multiple places in a quick time span, whether it be on the same day or whether it be like back-to-back days is what it is there. And I feel like in general, like specifically the best way to start this would be Minnesota, obviously, but then the fact of the matter is it might have to be a situation where you just kind of hopscotch is what it is there, because I feel like once you invoke it in Minnesota, you're going to have people in other states, a bunch of leftists in other states, whether it be California, Oregon, Washington State, New York, Maine, New Jersey, Michigan, etc. They're going to try to fucking vote. That I think is what's going to happen. It's basically going to create like this catalyst is what it is there, where it's like kind of fucking around to find out is what it is there. And what I think they're going to try to do, given that the terrorist left is the way it is right now, is what it is. Because let's be honest with ourselves, dude. A lot of this could be resolved right now if you just simply arrest various politicians out of office right now, is what it is right now. Because the fact of the matter is, Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, Amy Klobuchar, Peggy Flanagan, etc., they're in Minnesota. They should have already all been arrested for various high treason, is what it is. The same thing with Kathy Hochul. The same thing with Gavin Newsom. The same thing with Tina Kotex is another one there in Oregon. I'm not even sure who the fucking governor of Washington State is at this point. I think it was the jackass used to be AG there. So this would be like Bob Ferguson, maybe. I want to say, but I could be wrong about that one. Yeah, it's another one of these fuckers that need to be arrested out of office. Because the fact of the matter is, when you start looking at these Democrats, dude, they've all committed voter fraud to get into power right now, is what it is. Like, you look at Katie Hobbs is a great example of that one in Arizona there. She 100% stole that fucking election when she was a sitting Secretary of State, which, by the way, if she was going to be running for governor, she should have been forced to resign from the Secretary of State's office to begin with, because how the fuck are you going to be a sitting Secretary of State running for the governorship and be able to certify your own so-called win is what it is there? It's a bunch of bullshit entirely, dude. And then when you look into that, it's a bunch of fucking cartel shit there is what it is, and like a bunch of cartel infiltration and stuff like that. That's another problem as well, too, for that matter. And the potential X factor of potential Insurrection Act invocation is what it is right now, is the fact that you have all these outside factors, whether it be cartels infiltrating this country, whether it be a bunch of Islam infiltrating the country and having sleeper cells everywhere, whether it be Chinese foreign nationals having the same shit is what it is there with their Chinese sleeper cells, whether it be just all kinds of outside forces, basically, that, again, when all this stuff goes down and we have a potential second civil war in this country, it would then lead to other things, including, a race war, including holy wars, etc. there, because you would have so many outside factors that would then be trying to, bang up against the freedom of this nation is what it is there, that it would turn this country into this crazy colonial region type of situation again. There's what it is. And this is why I feel like we are definitely on like the last gasp of being a fucking nation at this point, because whether it be the globalist infiltration, whether it be the Islamic infiltration, whether it be the Indian influence, etc. there is a lot of bad shit going on right now on all fronts. But the fact of the matter is, when you have these people who are the crazy ass left, which make up the majority of the fucking left at this point, I would say, like, really, if I'm going to talk about the crazy ass left, it's more like about 85% of the fucking left at this point, maybe 95% at this point, honestly, that are completely psychotic, and you only have like 5% that are completely psychotic is what it is there. So this is the problem entirely. But the fact of the matter is, when you have, potential to invoke the Insurrection Act and do what needs to be done there, now is the time to do it, honestly. So, but yeah, like I said, you got that one for Trump Hummel, Minnesota, and it goes on to talk about all this other stuff and whatnot, and basically the whole Renee Good shooting and stuff like that was there. Then we have this one from, sorry, that's my stomach growling. We got this one from the AP, Insurrection Act, how it's been used and what Trump wants to do with it. We're just going to read the headlines on this one. We're not going to bother reading the actual articles because we're going to go and read the Insurrection Act itself in about 5 minutes, honestly. I just wanted to go over like the whole thing. Here's what it is. Of like how all these different media outlets are trying to portray this as what it is, if it's such a bad thing or whatever the case be. Then we got Al Jazeera saying Trump threatens to use Insurrection Act in Minnesota. What it means? It means restoring law and order is what it means, actually, dude. Again, really, Trump should have used it back in 2020 against the Chads and everything else. Like that's what it is there. So, anyway, we got this one. GOP rhino senators try to talk Trump down from invoking Insurrection Act in Minneapolis. Anybody trying to talk him down from doing that, dude, needs to be fucking arrested for high treason at this point, legitimately, because they are the goddamn rhino traitors of this fucking country is what it is. So, anyway. Let's see what else we got here now. Yeah, we had this one from Washington Post. They're stupid. Get the fuck out of here, dude. I don't want to give you money, you fucking douchebags. What could happen if Trump invokes Insurrection Act in Minnesota? Again, law and order gets restored, you fucking retards. That's what happens. So, anyway. I also do want to point out what this conspiracy actually is before we go on to the Insurrection Act thing, because that's what these people were doing there in Minnesota when they were attacking that federal agent's vehicle and stealing the rifle and everything else out of it there. So, this conspiracy is a U.S. federal crime where 2 or more people conspired by force to overthrow the government, levy war against it, which is what they're doing right now, oppose its authority, again, what they're doing right now, or forcibly prevent execution of any U.S. law with penalties up to 20 years in prison, and involves planning to use force to obstruct the government's functions, such as preventing the certification of an election. There's some bullshit there. It said, unlike simple criticism, it requires agreement to act violently or forcibly against the government, etc., etc. So, yeah, basically, that's how you can tell it was AI and fucking leftist generated there at the end of the day when it used January 6th bullshit. Because, first of all, people like Stuart Rhodes should never been charged underneath that as a bunch of crap, honestly, dude. Half the people weren't even there at the time that were charged this conspiracy there on January 6th. Because, again, and this is the problem that comes to Democrats, dude. Like, this is my biggest issue with the Republican Party and rhinos in general being in power right now, because they don't have the fucking balls to stomp on the fucking Democrats' head at that point, dude. The thing with Democrats, dude, is they'll tell you what they're going to do when they take power. As soon as they take power, they're going to fucking do it. If they're going to tell you, hey, we're going to put a gun to your head and pull the trigger, they're going to fucking do that. That's what it is when they get in power. Or if they're going to put a gun to your head to take your gun, like, they'll do that shit, honestly, dude. And they've admitted that, you know? Like, they talk about gun control all the time is what it is there. And then they try the shit. Even when they're not fucking having majority power is what it is, they'll still try to do that shit, honestly, dude. So, this is the issue entirely right now. And the problem is, when you have sitting pieces of shit in political power that shouldn't be there to begin with, is what it is, people like Ilhan Omar, etc., who are openly calling for riots, who are openly committing seditious conspiracy, who are openly committing sedition, who are openly committing various terrorism, and not being removed from office, not being removed from this country entirely. This is the fucking problem. And when you have these people that are continuing to remain in power like that and not being dealt with accordingly, this is the problem when you have a bunch of rhinos in power, dude, because they have no fucking balls, because it's all some unity party bullshit where they let these fucking terrorists run roughshod over everybody's what it is then, dude, instead of kicking them in the fucking face and then stomping on their fucking head when they're on the ground is what it is, dude. Because that's what needs to happen right now. Like, we honestly are way past the point right now where it needs to be gallows being built again, honestly, for these fuckers, dude, in many cases. Because that's how this is going to end, honestly. Like, this is what needs to end with the Insurrection Act, honestly, dude, is a bunch of these leftist terrorists, these street-level motherfuckers, and the politicians that are fucking, pulling the puppet strings and stuff like that, need to be at the end of the fucking rope, honestly. And it's dead fucking time to do that shit, honestly, dude, right now. So, anyway. But going on and discussing what the actual Insurrection Act itself is right now. So in 1807, this was our founding fathers basically created the Insurrection Act, by the way, I want to point that out. 1807 empowers the President of the United States to nationally deploy U.S. military and to federalize National Guard units in individual states in specific circumstances such as the suppression of civil disorder or insurrection of an armed rebellion against the federal government of the United States. The Insurrection Act provides statutory exemptions to the Passes Comitatus Act of 1878 that limits presidents deploying of U.S. military to enforce either civil law or criminal law within the United States after invoking or before executing the powers authorized under the Insurrection Act. Title 10 requires the publication of a presidential proclamation whereby the U.S. president formally orders the dispersion of the people committing civil unrest or armed rebellion. The Defense Department guidelines define a homeland defense as a constitutional exemption to the restrictions of the Passes Comitatus Act, therefore a political, military, or police measures necessary to protect national security from external threats are exemptions to the restrictions of the Act. But this is the purpose and the content here is what it is. Insurrection 1807 empowers the U.S. President to call into service the U.S. Armed Forces and National Guard. And then it has three different possibilities where you can do this, obviously. Obviously, this is signed into power by, signed into law by founding father Thomas Jefferson is what it was back in March 1807. But yeah, it's the three different possible invocation possibilities there is. Required by state legislator or governor if the legislator cannot be convened to quell an insurrection against the state. So basically, it would be a governor calling in and being like, hey, I need you to come in here and like deal with this because we can deal with it ourselves, basically, what it is there. Second possibility is to address an insurrection in any state which renders impracticable the enforcement of the law, which is what we're seeing there in Minnesota. And number three, to address an insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy in any state which results in the deprivation of constitutionally secured rights, where the state is unable, fails, or refuses to protect said rights, which is exactly what we're seeing in Minnesota too. So basically, Trump can enact it based on both of those things right there is what it is, dude. It says, as a federal law, Insurrection Act of 1807 replaced the earlier Coming Forth Act of 1792 that allowed the federalization of state militias. The legal language of the Insurrection Act allowed for either the federalization of state militias or the use of regular armed forces to quell any rebellion against the state government. However, the Insurrection Act did not stipulate any criminal penalties for insurrectionists, which penalties later was introduced in the Confiscation Act of 1862. The original text of the Insurrection Act is, and that goes on there, just talk about that one. So basically, let's go ahead and talk about the Confiscation Act of 1862 that is there as well. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so under the Act, conviction of treason against the United States is punishable by death or carrying a minimum prison sentence of 5 years and $10,000 fine. The law also stated that any citizen convicted of aiding and abetting any person known to have committed treason against the United States be in prison for 10 years and face a maximum of $200,000 fine if convicted. So, yeah, but basically you can face a death penalty is what it is there. That's what it needs to be at this point, honestly, due to many of these fucking cases. So, But we're going to go ahead and talk about the actual times that the Insurrection Act was invoked. Here's what it is. So the first time was April 19th, 1808 by Founding Father Thomas Jefferson, and it was for violations of the Embargo Act of 1807 around Lake Champlain. That eventual Embargo Act was repealed in 1809 is what it was then. Second time around was not until February 10th, 1831, so it was almost 30 years later, by then secondary dude, Andrew Jackson. The first time around on February 10th was a dispute around the Arkansas-Mexico border, resolved before the troops were actually sent out there is what it was, because obviously that was back in the time period where it was like, yeah, you can have this stuff done. But the fact of the matter is that because of how you would have like a letter basically sent to a president or whatever the case be, it wouldn't get there until 2 or 3 weeks later is what it is then. And by the time they sent the troops out there, it could have already been resolved 5-6 days before you even try to send people out there is what it is then. So that's the difference between then and now, obviously, is we have the power to just do troops on the ground in 10 minutes basically what it is. They're off of some plane or some whatever the case be there. And then the second time, actually Andrew Jackson invoked this 3 times that it was there. Second time Jackson did it was August 24th, 1831, which was the slave rebellion in Southampton County, Virginia, and it was a rebellion being suppressed. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that was the Nat Turner Rebellion, I believe is what it was there, but I could be wrong about that one. Oh, yeah, there it is. Yeah, Nat Turner's Rebellion. So, yeah, second time was to do Nat Turner's Rebellion is what it was there, and basically it was slaves trying to rise up against their slave owners is what it was back then, and you basically had them stomped out pretty quickly is what it is there. And the third time for Andrew Jackson was January 28th, 1834, which was a riot over labor dispute in Maryland, again resolved before the troops were actually sent out there is what it was. So actually only one of the 3 times that Andrew Jackson invoked the Insurrection Act, it actually got dealt with, which was the slave rebellion there is what it is. The other 2 times it was resolved before the troops actually got sent there is what it was then. And then from there we had President Abraham Lincoln in April 15th, 1861, enacting the Insurrection Act, which eventually led to the eventual American Civil War is what it was then. So, anyway. Then from there, you had Ulysses S. Grant enacted on several times, actually. He did it on October 17th, 1871, May 22nd, 1873, December 21st, 1874, May 15th, 1874, September 15th, 1874, and finally October 17th, 1876. And specifically for all those ones, the first time he did it, it was a white supremacist insurgency across former Confederacy states. The insurgency got suppressed there. Second time in 1873, it was violence in Louisiana after contested elections. Specifically, that violence that occurred there was the Colfax Massacre, Colfax Riot in Louisiana, and it was supposed to be over the 1872 election there for the governor's race, where I believe it was, I forget which party it was that actually supposedly stole that race, and that's basically what led to that one is what it was then. Then you had December 21st, 1874, was another white supremacist insurrection and massacre in Vicksburg, Virginia. Or sorry, not Vicksburg, Vicksburg, Mississippi. That was another insurrection being suppressed. And specifically that was the Vicksburg Massacre in Vicksburg, Mississippi is what it was there. The, let's see, 1, 2, 3, fourth time around on May 15th, 1874, was another white supremacist attempted coup in Arkansas, which was resolved before the troops got sent out there. So that was kind of a Andrew Jackson kind of situation too as well. There's what it was, where it got resolved before it actually needed troops on the ground. There's what it was, and they could get on the ground basically what it is there. Then you had September 15th, 1874, another white supremacist insurgency coup in Louisiana. This was the Battle of Liberty Place, or Battle of Canal Street is what they call it there. It was New Orleans, the state government liberated. Insurgency continued in other areas until 1877. Then you had the final time for Ulysses S. Grant was October 17th, 1876, which was white supremacist paramilitaries in South Carolina. Paramilitaries dispersed, troops stay until 1877. And then from there, you had Rutherford B. Hayes enacted twice, first on July 18th, 1877, then again on October 7th, 1878. First time was a railroad strike in multiple states, strike suppressed, eventual reform. Then the 78 one was a war between rival businesses / gangs, which was basically Lincoln County War, is what it was, for those who don't know. That was the one that Billy the Kid was involved in there, is what it was. So then from there you had 1882 was Chester A. Arthur, which ironically enough, Chester A. Arthur was actually the dude who became president because the guy before him was actually shot and killed. They actually did a series about this recently. It was called Death by Lightning. It was actually pretty good if you get a chance to watch it. I was just watching it. It's got specifically the dude who was Ron Swanson as Chester A. Arthur, and he did a pretty good job as Chester A. Arthur, honestly. And it's kind of interesting too to look at Chester A. Arthur because the stuff that he actually put in as president there is a lot of those laws were still in the books through what became the civil rights era of the 1960s, what it was there. So, yeah, the only time he did it was May 3rd, 1882, and it was gang violence in the Arizona Territory, gang suppressed. Then you had November, you had Grover Cleveland was the next president to invoke the Insurrection Act, which was November 7th, 1885, February 9th, 1886, and then July 8th of 1894. So the first two times were riots against Chinese citizens in the Washington Territory, occurred in 1885 and 1886, and that was riot suppressed. Then you had 1894 was strike in multiple states, specifically the Pullman strike, where the strike was suppressed, then is what it was. Moving on from there into the 19th, or the 20th century, I guess it would be, because that would be the 19th century still. So yeah, moving on to the 20th century, 20 years later, on April 28th, 1914, President Woodrow Wilson enacted the Insurrection Act, and it was a strike and uprising in Colorado, specifically the Colorado Coalfield War, where the strike and uprising were suppressed, eventual reform. Then from there, 7 years later, you had President Warren G. Harding on August 30th, 1921, have a strike and uprising in West Virginia. Specifically, it was the Battle of Blair Mountain, and that was eventually suppressed, and everything was dealt with accordingly. Then from there, 11 years later, you had Douglas MacArthur enact it on July 28th, 1932. Army General illegally invokes Act against World War I veterans marching for military bonuses in Washington, D.C., protests suppressed. And then you have the other times, obviously, here, which were 11 years after that, on June 21st, 1943, Franklin Delano Roosevelt did it for the race riots in Detroit, specifically in 1943, Detroit race riot is what it was, and that riot got suppressed then. Then 14 years later, on September 23rd, 1957, Dwight D. Eisenhower did it for the Arkansas National Guard, forbids black students from a school in Little Rock, Arkansas. Specifically, this was the, I believe this one had to do with black kids in white schools at the time, if I'm not mistaken. And that was Arkansas National Guard federalized and ordered to stand down. Federal troops escort black students to school. And then from there, you had JFK enacted a bunch of times, and LBJ enacted a bunch of times too as well. So JFK did it on September 30th, 1962, June 11th, 1963, September 10th, 1963. First time was the siege and riot, or the Ole Miss riot of 1962, Battle of Oxford. University of Oxford, Mississippi, due to racial integration. So that was basically them trying to mix black and white schools and stuff like that at universities, which was the time. And the second time in 1963, it was the governor of Alabama forbids black students from the school in Tuscaloosa standing at the schoolhouse doors. What this one was from. This was George Wallace is the one that was the governor of Alabama at the time that did that. And then he tried to run for president after the fact. I believe it was after JFK's assassination, but then failed miserably is what it was then. Because he was just an old Dixiecrat racist piece of shit, basically, what was there. So, but yeah, it was Alabama National Guard federalized in order to stand down federal troops to escort black students to school. And then September 10th, 1963, Alabama National Guard forbids black students from all white schools. Again, that's when they were federalized and forced to stand down, basically, what it is there. Then, under LBJ's administration, March 20th, 1965, you had Alabamian police suppress first Selma to Montgomery marches. This is basically the civil rights marches of the 1960s. Federalization of Alabama National Guard before the Third March. Then you had July 24th, 1967, which was protests and riots in Detroit. This was, I believe, I want to say this would have been over MLK's assassination, maybe, but I could be wrong about that one. But yeah, this is basically the 67 Detroit race riots and stuff like that. That's what it is there. And then you had, maybe it was this. Yeah, okay, no, I'm sorry. I was wrong about that one. This was the one leading up to MLK's assassination in 67, because it was 68 was the last one there on April 5th, 1968, where it was riots and civil unrest, aka what they called the Holy Week Uprising, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. What was there on the 4th of. So it was like the day after he was assassinated. Was the next day was when they were doing the various riots in the streets. After that's what it was then. Then from there, you did not have the Insurrection Act being invoked for almost another 20 years. Specifically, it was 19 years later, on November 24th, 1987, by Ronald Reagan, which was a prison riot in Alabama over announced deportations of Cuban detainees. That riot was suppressed. Then from there, you had the last two times the Insurrection Act was enacted was by George H.W. Bush, first on September 20th, 1989, for looting in the United States Virgin Islands after Hurricane Hugo hit. And that was basically to restore order. And the last time was May 1st, 1992, specifically for the good old LA race riots of 1992 is what it was there. So, and I believe this was a total of 31 times. I have to go back and count that just to make sure on that one. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Yep, 31 times. So technically, if Trump doesn't act, it'll only be the 32nd time in U.S. history that the Insurrection Act was ever invoked since 1907, which is pretty crazy to think about, that we've had it in place for over 200 and almost 20 years now is what it is. And it's only been invoked 30-ish times right now is what it is. And it really shows like exactly why it had to be enacted, dude, is because in many cases, when you look at more than half of those, it was various riots, various worker strikes, etc., that had to be suppressed as it was then. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. We're seeing rioting, we're seeing looting, we're seeing literal federal vehicles have tow straps put around various locked gun cases in the fucking things and have the entire case be yanked out of the fucking vehicle by these nutters. And it's like, yeah, if there's ever been a time where the Insurrection Act needs to be invoked again right now, dude, it's here in 2026 is what it is for real. Because enough is enough of this shit, man. Enough is enough of it. It's time to get things done. It's time to restore order in this country. And if that means legitimately dealing with the shit in Minnesota, and even if that means it fucking pops up other places and we deal with it then as well, dude, on top of that, okay, cool, good. You know? The biggest problem I have right now with these lying-ass Democrats out there, though, is that they're trying to basically claim that the Insurrection Act and martial law are the same thing when they're not. one is a different thing than the other, obviously. Which, by the way, Trump could technically invoke martial law if he wanted to, too, for this point, honestly, dude. But that would be more of a nationwide thing at that point. Versus Insurrection Act could be a state by state, or even like, you know, some major city in a state is what it is there that the governor doesn't want to deal with. There's what it is there. So, but yeah, it's a bunch of shit, honestly, dude. So, anyway. Also, I want to I want to point this out too as well for those that haven't heard about it. In the last week or so here, Trump has also now made it so that you cannot have 75 different countries have visas in them anymore, is what it is, to America here. Yeah, he didn't put India in that 75, which I think is interesting. And this actually here is pretty interesting on that one. From the Constitution's there on Facebook, or on X, where she said, U.S. froze visa processing for 75 countries, but not India. Here's why. Modi and Vivek Ramaswamy have a professional relationship with meetings where they discuss India-U.S. relations, innovation, entrepreneurship. By the way, if you doesn't know who Modi is, it's the guy that's the president of India, I believe it is there. And culture, particularly around Modi's visits to the U.S. They met in Washington, D.C., February 2025. Where Modi also met Ramaswamy's father-in-law, exploring opportunities of collaboration. And then here's the actual list of the 75 countries that were put on the ban list, really, is what it is there, which is Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Antigua, Barbuda. Oh, sorry, I'm wrong with that one. It's actually the same. That Antigua and Barbuda are one country, is what it is there. So it'd be like Trinidad and Tobago, I think is what it is there, kind of deal. You got Rwanda, a bunch of other ones there as well. So Kosovo is also on there, which I think it's weird, interesting that Kosovo is on there because isn't Kosovo pretty close to Russia? I want to say, because I know we did there was like a Kosovoan war, if I'm not mistaken, back in the day in the 80s. So, but yeah, it's bullshit. There's not India on that list though, dude, even though it should be, because it's the top motherfucking shit show of all of them that bring H-1Bs here is what it is. So, but anyway, but yeah, needless to say, Trump needs to invoke the Insurrection Act, because if he doesn't, there's definitely going to be another 1776 in this country very soon is what it is, dude, and it's going to be right after you have a whole bunch of other war stuff going on then, where it starts out as a bunch of civil wars and then becomes an actual revolution eventually is what it'll be. So, but other than that, I think I'm going to call it a day on that one because I am pretty much done with today's episode, and I'm also getting very tired. My mind is kind of out of it right now. And for those who don't know, it's obviously been cold. That's why I got the throw on me right now is what it is. It was down to -3 or 4 this morning, actually. And then eventually got warmer today. It's about 20 degrees warmer than it was yesterday. And it's supposed to be getting colder again this couple of days, obviously. I think by Tuesday we're supposed to be in the single digits, if I'm not mistaken, so it should be about -7 or 8 then, obviously. I don't understand this weather, dude. We've never, as far as I can remember, we have never had weather like this in Ohio before. So it's this is basically either Minnesota weather or some Canadian weather is what it is coming down to us now. So yeah, it's just nuts, dude. But and I think that's on. I think sadly the only reason that a lot of this stuff is not going on here in Ohio and other states like that right now is because it is so cold. And I think the other reason it's going on in Minnesota right now is because they haven't had a crazy snowstorm come in there and blast them to freezing temps again, is what it is there. So, but yeah, it definitely needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with accordingly. And if Trump wants to have midterm elections, dude, that's what it needs to be right now. It needs to be suppressed before that happens, obviously. And I'm almost I'm half wondering right now if that's the reason why he's middling around about it, because he's oh, well, it might cost Republicans in midterms. It's dude, fuck the election cycle entirely. We shouldn't even be having elections at this point anyway, because we should have already had a bunch of legitimate election audits that proved voter fraud by a bunch of Democrats to where they would be arrested out of office to begin with, what it is there. And only after that shit happens, which is going to take at least a year or two to get it all done. After that would be when we have elections again, is what it is then. So, yeah, it's a bunch of crap all the way around. But anyway, on that note, though, I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I will see you all on the next one. Peace out. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. Always be caring. Always be situationally aware. And always know those around you, as well as your exits from any place that you are in, because you never know when a bunch of crazy fucking leftist terrorists are going to try to do some terrorist shit. And it's that simple, honestly. Later, y'all. Peace out. Bye.